Taras, hello.
Hey,
Hello.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. You well. Welcome to Devoxx. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. As you can
Okay,
see, I have much longer hair than the picture.
this is funny. I know that you are a true Java evangelist and you have your own YouTube channel, which is called Code, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so can you tell more about this channel? What was the idea? What motivates you?
Sure. The idea was to create an open source education and basically share all the educational materials we have and share all the experience we have to the community so people who start and then who just want to improve their skills can learn some stuff from that channel.
Sounds interesting and fantastic. Okay, so now it's your turn to shine on this online stage. So go ahead with your talk.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, in order to make it more official, I get my badge from the last year. So it's more like the regular conference, but just sitting here. So I guess, guys, you all came here to get the answer for this question, basically. If you're using Kotlin instead of Java for the backend development, does the fancy code bring much value? You ready? It does. Thank you all very much. Well, actually, if you're here and you want to talk a bit, I can tell you even more. Kotlin, as a modern programming language that makes developers happier, doesn't just makes developer happier. It doesn't just bring more value. It can literally save your lives. And I have a scientific proof for you today. So I'm honored to welcome you at Devoxx Ukraine. My name is Taras, and I'm software engineering consultant and a teacher. I'm passionate a lot about building software, but I'm also passionate about education. And I believe that as humans, we have a tremendous potential of intelligence and creativity. And I enjoy so much both learning and teaching. So working with Kotlin, I felt like it's a very nice and pragmatic language, very good language. And I would keep asking questions like, how much real value does it bring on top of Java, especially in terms of the server side development? So today, I don't expect you to learn anything major about Kotlin, but I also don't expect you to have any experience. That's fine if you don't. We will see everything we need to see about Kotlin. And what's the most important is that we will see another point of view, just another point of view that will help you to be more accurate if you'll be deciding to switch to Kotlin or not. Maybe a couple points of view, okay? So if you have experience with Kotlin, most probably you already know that it's pretty strong if you want to use it for the reactive stuff, right? But what if you don't? What if you don't want to use reactive stuff and you don't plan to use it anytime soon? How much value would you get in that case? That's also interesting. And basically, the last thing I want to mention before we'll dive into the code, it's 2020. So it was a damn hard year. And also today is Friday, which means you've been working hardly during the whole week. And I don't want any disappointments for you. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy Kotlin. Okay? So we'll now go and write some code. And you know where should we start from? We should start from start.spring.io. And we will pick Kotlin here. So in case you've never choose Kotlin here, congrats, that's your first time. I'm gonna change the package here and I'm gonna say that it's Kotlin demo, okay? And I'm gonna choose Java 15 here. Again, if that's your first time using Java 15, congrats. We'll need Spring Web because we want to build a REST API using Kotlin. We'll need JPA because we want to create some entities and build some logic around them using Kotlin. And we want an H2 database so we can actually store the data into the database and try to load them from there. So I'm going to generate this package, and I will try to unzip Kotlin demo. I'm going to try to open it using IDE. While it's loading, I'm going to tell you that I was planning actually to write some Java application and then rewrite it using Kotlin. But then I realized that it's not going to be very helpful because you all know how Java looks like. Nothing special there. And also, even if you don't have experience with Kotlin, you will still be able to compare how the same tasks look in Kotlin, okay? So we're trying to build a regular Spring Boot app where we have database, where we have JPA repositories, where we have JPA entities, where we have REST APIs, and where we have some logic around that stuff. So around those stuff. So that's pretty regular, and it should look like our day-to-day tasks, very simple tasks. But we will look how those tasks, how can we achieve the same thing using Kotlin instead of Java. And this is just for you to be able to feel what it means to use Kotlin, okay? So let's start from running this application. And again, if something will not be working, I'm going to blame 2020. So just in case. I guess it's working. Nothing special there. Yes, it does. So, and the first thing we're going to see is Kotlin demo application, where we can find Spring Boot application. And what's interesting here is a main function is a separate function. So I guess you already know that in Kotlin, you don't have to create functions that belong to some class. You can just create a function if you want. So in this case, we have Spring Boot class, Spring Boot application class, and then we have a separate main function. Nothing special, and we'll move forward. So the first thing, we want to work with persons, and we want to create a person entity. So we'll create a file persons, and we'll create a data class called person. And we'll do the following. I'm going to write some code and try to run it, and then we'll see that it's working. And then we'll be able to come back and discuss why and how it's working. So a data class person will be our JPA entity. And I'm going to need a ID, which is long. And I'm going to need a email, basically, which is string. And that's pretty much it right now. It's working very slowly because of the whole setup, I guess. And it's our JPA entity, which is, yes, just loading pretty slow. I'm gonna enable presentation mode so you'll be able to see it better. And now I have, as you know, in JPA, I have to specify an identifier. And I'm gonna say that this identifier is generated by the database. Okay, good. So now I will need to have a repository for this entity. So I'm going to create an interface called persons, and I will extend JPA repository for person entity and long primary key. Good. We'll discuss the details later. Just try to make something working. And now I'll create a person controller. and it's a class person controller. It's a regular Spring Boot REST controller with the regular request mapping that starts from person, nothing fancy yet. And here I'm going to create an endpoint that allows me to create a person. So in order to have that endpoint, I need to have post mapping. And then I need to create a function. So in Java, we would call it method, but in Kotlin, we will call it member function. And this function is called create person, for instance. It accepts a person, and that person is passed in the request body, right? And now we need to store it. So we need a repository. I'm gonna ask Spring to inject a repository here, and I'm gonna use that repository to save that person. Oh my gosh, save. Okay, again, let's try to make it work, and then we'll discuss all the details. Okay, so it's restarting. Hope it's working. So here we have an entity, and I guess it's enough to declare only ID, an email, and now I'm gonna try to call that endpoint by creating an HTTP request to the person, and I'm gonna say that content type is application JSON, and here I only need to specify email, and I would call it voxian@gmail.com. Let's try to call it. It works. So it stored that person and it generates the ID, and it's working like that. So as you can see here, we don't open curly braces, we just use equals sign, and it means that instead of opening curly braces and and returning this thing and specifying a return type of this function, we can get rid of all those stuff, and we can just use the equal sign and get rid of the return. So in this case, Kotlin knows that we will return what we will return from here. So we can get basically the body and the return type and the return value just from this expression. And that's enough, okay? So what I'm gonna do next, I'm gonna create another entity and link those entities between, because it's very easy to create just one entity in Hibernate, but it becomes much more interesting when you have a couple entities, and then you can build some logic there. So here, let's discuss what we have. A data class is nothing special. It's kind of similar to the annotation data that we use from Lombok in Java. Basically, data class provides you equals, hash code, toString, it provides you copy function and stuff like that. It's heavily used and it's pretty nice feature. Then val means immutable, var means mutable, question mark means this value can be null, no question marks means this value can never be null, and we will be back to discussing those features later. Now, in order to extend something, we just put column, and we don't have to provide a body, and we don't have to create a separate file for each class. So we can just put this interface in this class into one file called persons, okay? Then here, again, we use primary constructor arguments, basically to ask Spring to inject us the repository. And this basically turns persons into a property of the person controller class. So nothing special here, and we will now create another class called nodes, another file called nodes, and we will create another data class called node, because persons want to have nodes. So node will be another JPA entity. It will have an ID as we had in previous example, but it will also have, for instance, title, which is string, and it will also have, for instance, body, which is string. It will also have, for instance, created at, which is local date time, and it equals now. Oh my. And we will also have, what's more interesting, a person. Okay, so of course it takes time to add all those properties, but I guess it's important so we can not just create a super simple class, but we will have at least some stuff, and we will have at least two entities, and we will try to link them and then build some logic. And you can see this code written in Kotlin, and you can compare how much code would you write using Java. Okay, so this person is a relationship of a node, and it's many to one relationship, because we have multiple nodes for one person. We at least can have multiple nodes, and this relation is handled in the database by a column called person ID. So here on the level of JPA entity, we have node and person, and basically node stores a reference to a person, but in the database, table node will only have additional column, person ID, which is Frankie referencing person table. Nothing special, you've seen that before. So we will now go to the controller, and we'll try to create another post endpoint, trying to implement add node for pass variable person ID and request body node. Okay, so here we will do the following. We will pass person ID. Of course, we'll pass person ID as a pass variable, and then we'll say nodes. It's like following the REST convention, right? So persons want, for instance, nodes, and we're posting a request where in the body we pass a node. Okay, so now I'm gonna first describe you what we want to do. Here in mappings, we have mapped this relationship as unidirectional, because in Hibernate we can map it unidirectional if we want to map it from the child side. Okay, and we don't have to create a list of nodes here, for instance. That's enough. We won't do that. And in order to store a new node for a particular person, we will need to create this object. We will have it. Then we will need to set a proper person there, and then we will need to store that node. So for sure, we will need to have a repository, interface nodes that extends JPA repository, nothing special again here. Okay, we will need that repository here for sure. And who wants to do that? So node let it person equals persons get one person ID and nodes save it. Okay, we think it will work. If you're not able to catch up, that's fine. We're gonna try to call that endpoint, and then we'll be back discussing how it works. So probably I've missed something over here that prevents application from starting. Let me check that. Why not? Boom. Okay, error creating, I guess because we did something wrong in the mapping that prevents it from creating. So yeah, we didn't put an ID here. Sorry about that. Generated value. Yes, that's why people don't like live coding sessions, because you can get stuck with super simple mistakes, but when you're doing it on the conference, it puts some pressure on you, so then you can get stuck really hard. Okay, now we'll need to create this person again. That works, and we will create another HTTP request, posting the message, actually the note, with some title. How do you want me to say it? Call it. I'm going to call it greeting, and the body of this note will be, hey you guys. Okay, let me try to call it. Okay, so it works. As you can see, it stored this particular note and associated it with that person. Okay, cool. So now, going back to the controller, how this thing works. First of all, function let is a special function, and we will dive into its implementation a bit later if you want, but it basically allows me to do some logic with the object I'm calling this function on, and I can access this object node by using keyword it. Okay, hello Groovy. So now I need to set a person, okay, but I have only an ID, and it will be stupid to load a person from the database. So Hibernate provides a special method that allows me to create a proxy, wrap that ID using a proxy. So, and that method in Spring Data JPA repository is called get1, but if you'll see the implementation of it, it's calling entity manager get reference, okay? So we're getting reference of that person just in order to set the relationship, and store it with the proper frame key. And then we call the repository method save, and we're passing it. Hello, Groovy. So we did that, and it worked. And we will go and see how the let looks like a bit later. Because right now, what we want to have is we want to build a page that shows all the nodes for a person. So we will have a get mapping for the same URL, and we'll have a function get all nodes by person, for instance, and we'll say that we are passing a person ID here, which is a pass variable, right? And what we want to do here is we want to do something like nodes find all by person ID, pathing person ID there. Okay, I'm going to create that function. Okay, here ID is not helping much. So the return type will be list of nodes, for instance. I want to have a list of nodes. Okay, but what's bad here is that it's going to return me the whole node object that looks like this. And I'm going to have an array of such objects. But in order to build that page, I just need ID and title. Okay? So in those cases, what we usually do, we go and create some data transfer object, and we will call it node DTO. Okay? And it will have val ID type long and val title of type string. Okay? And here in the controller, we'll say map it to DTO. We don't have that function, right? Node class doesn't have that function, but it will in a minute. Create extension function. So we don't need it, and we'll say just node DTO, and we will pass this ID, and we will pass this title, and compiler will complain. So I'm going to do the following, and as usual, I'm going to explain it. If you don't know what it means, I'm going to explain it a bit later. I remember that funny story when during a lesson of drawing, one little girl was very busy trying to draw something, and the teacher asked her, "What are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "But nobody knows how God looks like." And the girl said, "They will in a minute." So as you see here, we didn't have, like, node class didn't have this function to DTO, but it got it in a minute. So we now have this function DTO. It's called extension function, and we will again come back to this a bit later. Just let's try to run this thing. And creating person, done. Creating some greetings, maybe another one, done. And the most interesting part is the get endpoint. Okay, boom, it works. So going back to the controller, this thing is called extension function, which allows you to add methods to some class without changing that class. And basically, you most probably you've seen such approach before. For instance, Groovy had this similar idea, but the implementation was completely different. And here it's very important because extension functions allows you to change the API in the way you want it to have without changing the API itself. And for instance, let is also an extension function that allows you to call function let on any object of type t and do some work with it and then return the result of a different type r. Okay? And what's cool about Kotlin is that it has this ability of creating extension function, but it also has a lot of useful extension functions, which is very cool. So another important note here is this method. Well, I keep saying method, this member function map. So map is a function that accepts a function as argument. Okay? So basically what you would do here is call map as regular function, and then you have to pass a function. And in Kotlin, if you want to have a function, you have to create open curly braces. And then here you will say node to DTO, right? But first, Kotlin, again, has this feature that allows you to do the following. if the last argument of your function is a function, you can just open the curly braces. Okay, so you can skip this part, first thing, and then you can access the object of type T. Instead of using node, you can use it. Okay, you don't have to declare that variable there. Okay, so we can create functions without classes. We can pass functions as arguments to other functions. If that function is the last argument, we can just open curly braces and then give the body, which leads to an interesting stuff in terms of the domain-specific languages. And I'm going to give you a good link to check out after this coding session. So a couple things to notice is, first of all, each type is not nullable unless you put a question mark, okay? Then var is mutable, val is immutable, data class provides you a lot of useful methods. You can extend stuff like this. You can have interfaces and classes in one Kotlin file. You can skip class or interface body if you want. And here you can have extension functions like this. You can use already provided extension function like this. You can implement function like this without opening the curly braces. And you can, if the last argument is a function, you can do the following instead of passing that function as argument. And if you have to pass a value that's not nullable, but you have a nullable thing, Kotlin forces you to do something with that. You can do something like let la la la, but you can say like, I'm confident that I'm not gonna do a mistake here. So actually in this case, I know that data coming from the database, for sure those records have IDs, so I'm good here. But just an important note, and we will be discussing all those features a bit later. So I'm gonna stop this thing. And regarding the DSLs, it's very powerful feature. And one of the best examples I've seen before is Kofu, which is a Spring Boot project that allows you to configure a Spring Boot application using functional style, explicitly writing methods that create pins you need, or that create routers and endpoints. So you don't use annotations and reflection, but rather you write code that creates configuration you need. And it looks nice even using Java, but it looks awesome using Kotlin, because Kotlin have this ability to build domain-specific language. And I'm gonna show a link to you. This is the stock called Spring Boot Revisited with Kofu and Jafu. And it's very interesting because, for instance, when you create Spring Boot application by explicitly providing configuration rather than using reflection, the startup time is shorter. So it starts much faster. And it has a lot of different benefits. So just go ahead and check out the talk. I am sure it will be interesting for you if you haven't heard about it before. Okay, so there should be something more. What it means? It means that we've checked a lot of Kotlin features and they all look awesome and they're cool. But I promised you that I'm going to give you another point of view, a fresh look. Okay, so I was thinking about Kotlin and I thought like, language that makes developers happier. So I thought that I'm going to do a research and I'm going to find out what the heck makes developers happy. And then I'll see how it's connected to Kotlin. Well, I mean, why not? It's a conference, and at conferences, we must discuss new ideas, not just learn stuff. So I decided to do that. But as it turned out, it's not about the happiness actually, because happiness is the feature that enabled by default. And you can even remember yourself when you first discovered programming, you were very happy and excited about that, right? It was either Hello World, maybe Infinite Loop, and you were very happy back then. But all of a sudden, you became much more experienced and less happier. So the real question is, what makes us unhappy as software developers? So next step, I decided I'm gonna do a research and I'm gonna find out what makes developers unhappy. So then I can see how Kotlin fixes that. Okay, and guess what? There is a whole study on that. And the main point is, if you're unhappy and Kotlin makes developers happier, then how it's doing that? So there is a whole study which is called On the Unhappiness of Software Developers. Thank you guys, because those guys did all of the work and we can just use it. And basically what they did is they asked thousands of software developers what makes them unhappy. They got initial responses, grouped those responses, processed them, and create a list of unique causes of the unhappiness. Okay? Sounds a bit depressing. So a list of unique causes of the unhappiness, and send out another survey asking developers to vote for each cause. Okay? And eventually they got a list that is called top 10 causes of unhappiness. Okay, and I can give you 10 seconds to get familiar with that list. So if you read it carefully, you will notice that most of them are even not related to code, which is crazy, right? But that's interesting. But some of them are related, like bad code quality or unexplained broken code. And the real question is, if we have bad code, does the Kotlin forces developers to write better code? And I would say kind of, and I'm going to give you an example. So I'm not sure if you know this man. He's Sir Anthony Hoare, which is a great computer scientist, also known for inventing null references. And that's a very interesting story. And there is an article and recorded conference speech where Sir Hoare told his story, how he became software developer, how he was working on a new language for his company, and eventually how he came up with null references. And during that speech, Sir Hoare told that null references were his $1 billion mistake. And I guess you would all agree with that. Here's the link to that article and to that talk. I really encourage you to watch it and to think about it, because it brings you more context on null references. So even though null references were invented a long time before Java, as Java developers, we still get a chance to enjoy null references, and we all had a lot of troubles with null pointer exceptions. So here, Kotlin to the rescue. Kotlin, as you see in the code, you can have long or long question mark. You can have person or person question mark. You can have node or node question mark. Because Kotlin compiler forces you to specifically declare if the type is nullable or not, and it's checking it every time. Okay? So it decreases the amount of null pointer exceptions massively. And it's good, right? Just keep in mind, it's good for sure, but just keep in mind that nothing comes for free. Because if you want to be safer, then you have to do all those checks, but those checks takes time. So nothing comes for free. Bottom line from all that research, bottom line is Kotlin for sure can help you, but cannot make you happier, right? It will help you, but it won't make you happier. So now I guess I'm sure you all miss real conferences, right? You do. And at real conference in the evening, you would be hanging around with other folks and the bottle of Jack Daniels. And since pandemic took most of the joy, I just encourage you to be as much interactive as possible at this online conference. And I have a game for you. So the game is I'm gonna put a timer for 20 seconds, and I'm gonna ask you to do the following. Point out to different stuff and call them whatever you want, except what it really is, okay? Like monkey, okay, or refrigerator. So during 20 seconds, point out to different stuff, calling them anything you want, except what it really is, okay? I'm gonna put a timer for 20 seconds and go ahead. Okay, thank you guys. I appreciate that. And I bet that even before I started the timer, some of you already had a list of words you're about to say. Then some of you would go and say something like words that starts from letter A, or maybe things you've ate today. And since it's a Java conference, I'm sure there was a guy who was saying something like Java, Spring, Kubernetes, right? And why we have all of those patterns? So we have, most of us had a pattern of how to come up with a new word. It's because your brain tries to help you. Every time you start doing something, your brain tries to optimize the process. Another example is when you hear somebody talking monotonously, you say that person is boring, but what actually means monotonous? Like monotone means the same tone. So whenever you hear somebody talking monotonously for 10 or 15 minutes, your brain starts to whispering you something like, hey buddy, it was the same during 15 minutes. It's gonna be the same, so you can save some energy and what? And fall asleep. And you do fall asleep when you hear somebody talking monotonously for a long time. And you would say, why? Because one of the main daily jobs of our brain is to make sure you will survive. Okay? So that's why your brain tries to help, optimize, save energy, write less code. Are you getting it? So the point is that the difference between Java and Kotlin isn't that bad. It's your brain makes you feel the conciseness of the code is so critical. It's almost like if you're gonna keep writing Java, it's gonna kill you unless you will switch to Kotlin if you want to survive. Okay? That's my point of view, but I guess it's worth considering it. So Kotlin for sure provides a decent improvement. And as engineer and especially as a teacher, I want to be objective. I always want to be open-minded, but I want to be objective. And I was asked if Kotlin provides just a slight improvement, if it provides a decent improvement, or it's a completely new experience compared to Java. And my answer is it provides for sure a decent improvement. And I encourage you, go ahead and check out and start writing some code using Kotlin so you can have your own experience. But I'm sure it's not it doesn't able to provide a completely new experience because If you want to have completely new experience, it's completely up to you, okay? Because it's not about the language, it's about people who use the language. So I thank you a lot. And we have a couple points of view, and I hope those points of view will be able, you will be able to be more accurate using them. So Kotlin has great features. Java is trying to catch up. Your brain forces you to think that conciseness is so critical, and Kotlin for sure will help you, but it won't make you happier. Okay, if you feel like I'm underestimating Kotlin, maybe just because I'm jealous, and I think that designing a new language indeed is a super cool thing to do. And what inspires me even more is that whenever you start doing something with passion and creativity, it leads you to the results you couldn't even imagine at the beginning. I was talking to Andrei Breslav, who is the lead designer of Kotlin language, and he told that they didn't plan to create coroutines and they didn't plan to create Kotlin for Android at the beginning. Could you imagine it? So if you start working on something with passion and creativity, it leads you to the great results. And I wish you that today. Thanks again, and hope to see you soon.
Taras, thank you very much for a nice presentation, very interesting. I actually also miss offline conferences a lot. And what do you miss the most in offline conferences?
The atmosphere and real
Okay.
communication with other folks.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So thank you once again for the presentation. Now we will have Q&A session with you. So please join the Q&A session by the link. And I also encourage everyone to join Taras in Q&A session. And also I want to encourage to vote for Taras' speech through our application that you can download in the App Store and Google Play Market. So please go right now into the application and vote, vote, vote for Taras and his perfect speech.
Thanks.